All right, we are live, I think, and I want to. I'm going to vamp just for a few minutes while people trickle in here. Um, and if you've arrived and you've arrived early, like many trade compliance professionals, I want to thank you for coming and joining for this webinar. I'm really excited to be putting this on. Um, we've been working hard here at Third Wave around sort of the topic of audit for customs and trade compliance professionals, and I'm really excited to have this discussion with you. And I hope that it creates some value for you as you discuss what your needs are as you go into the future, and were some of the issues that we talk about interesting or relevant for the discussions you're having internally, then certainly we would appreciate that you reach out and we can have a conversation around it, because we've done a lot of thinking on this topic. So um, so right now, let's start going, and more people will trickle in, and that's okay. And we'll see where we go. And so let's start with uh, a cartoon. I was told always start with something a little bit light. Growing up, I was always a huge fan of Calvin and Hobbes, and I think that this cartoon really sort of sets the tone of some of the things that we're going to talk about today, where a lot of the audit process for customs that we do is a little bit performative, and we do it. We're told we need to do it. Customs mandates that we have some kind of process that provides a feedback loop for figuring out whether or not our process is working or not, and if there are errors, and if there are errors, do we correct them, and so on. But largely, we're in a state where we're largely ignorant. The process happens in a black box, and we're going to discuss a lot of that. And I think that sort of this cartoon captures a little bit of that. From an agenda perspective, even before I get to the agenda, a little bit of housekeeping. I expect that this presentation is going to be somewhere between 30 and 35 minutes. And we're going to have a little bit of time at the end if people have questions that we can discuss that. And with that said, if you have questions there, you can type them into the comment section. I will try to get to them as they come up. And if I don't, because I'm sort of in the flow state, as they say, then I'll try to get to them towards the end of the conversation. And if we run out of time, then I'll follow up with you offline. But here we go. We're going to talk about how the world has changed over the last little while. We used to live in one world, and we have progressed into a new world, and oftentimes we don't really acknowledge that that's happened, and so we're going to discuss that. In that old world, the process that we followed largely was sufficient, and we're going to talk about what that old process was and why what is required in this new world that we're in has fundamentally changed the calculus for how things are going. And then I'm going to talk, towards the end, about how Third Wave's audit tool really has been designed to address this new world that we're living in and the new requirements that sort of have been thrust upon us as trade compliance professionals. So, okay, one last piece of housekeeping that I guess I forgot to mention is that this is going to be recorded. And we're going to send out, the marketing team is going to send out an email as a follow-up, and you'll have the recording that you can watch to your heart's content, and maybe pull out some salient points. So don't feel free that you have to take notes. And then the last point I would make, just by way of housekeeping, is that I do a lot of writing on LinkedIn on the topic of supply chains and trade compliance in particular. And my perspective is generally from a first principles perspective on how we manage things from technology, and as technology intersects with supply chains and trade compliance. And so if you were so inclined, you can find me on LinkedIn. My contact information will be at the back, but I'm the only Grant Cernick around. And if you wanted to follow or connect with me, that would allow you to get the posts I get on my LinkedIn newsletter, which is called Importing Bunk. And I certainly would appreciate that. And I look forward to interacting with you there. All right, well, let's get going. So as I mentioned sort of in the lead up to this, I think that we all need to understand that the Trump administration, and even before the Trump administration, this is not a Trump thing, and when Trump is out of office, things are going to dramatically change. The Trump administration clearly has brought in a new world of trade and a new world order. It used to be in the old world that you had a product and it had an HTS code, and by virtue of that HTS code, you would be able to get to a customs entry through a reasonably straightforward transformation. The customs broker was the agent that worked on your behalf to effect a customs entry. And most importantly, that process was reasonably stable and unchanging. Yes, the HTS schedule was updated from time to time. Yes, there was some minor evolution in over those 40 years, really from the 80s all the way through to the 2020s. It was really 2016 when stuff really started to change. But things were stable. And what's important to note today is that CBP's posture has really changed quite dramatically. Whereas previously they have been in sort of a posture of trade facilitation, today's world, they really are about enforcement, and more specifically about revenue generation, which is a very particular flavor of enforcement, where if the enforcement can generate additional revenue, that is to the good from their perspective. Okay, so the posture change is significant. The second major change is that the complexity of filing a customs entry is dramatically different than it was back in the day. As I was saying earlier, when, in the 90s and early 2000s, filing a customs entry was really taking a product, identifying its HTS code, and you were able to get basically the duty rate that was applicable to it. You understood that you were in the most favored nations duty rate, and voila, you had your customs entry. In today's world, I mean, we're not even in the same dimension as we were, not even 20 years ago, but 5 or 10 years ago. We have 301s, 232s, IEPAs, reciprocal tariffs. The list you have metal or steel and aluminum content. The list goes on and on and on as the complexity grows. And we are in a dramatically different world. And that means because the complexity has increased, the oversight that is required to ensure that what you are doing and what your broker is doing on your behalf is correct has increased dramatically as well. The requirements have. Now, your resources largely haven't. And so you, as a trade compliance professional, are being asked and tasked with the goal of protecting your organization's reputation and customs process with limited resources, with your senior level administration not realizing that the risk has increased quite dramatically. And finally, and this is not to be diminished in the least, not that the first two weren't big enough, but CBP has made no bones about the fact that they are layering AI onto ACE and the data that sits in ACE. And so ACE was the ACE portal ushered in significantly a aggregation and centralization of trade data. And CBP has probably the largest database of trade data, certainly for in the US's case, but maybe around the world. And now with AI, they're able to layer AI onto that, on top of that, and they're able to figure out a whole host of things, both on the particular level, what's happening with your specific customs entry, but on a aggregate level that now if there is a vendor that is selling to multiple different parties, are the goods that they are selling classified using the same set of HTS codes? And so you have both the particular, what is going on with your entry, and are things being held consistent, but then they also have sort of systematic, system-wide patterns that they're able to now find and ferret out, which means that, well, your risk is increasing quite dramatically without you knowing it at all and without you doing anything. And even if you're doing everything that you think is correct, you still might have a significant amount of risk. And the only way to mitigate that risk is by improved process. So with those things in mind, here's, one of the things that has dramatically changed over time. CBP is going to find your errors, your mistakes, and discrepancies. Okay? There is no longer, they were previously limited on having an analyst, and they only had so many analysts that could do things, and they had a tight budget, and that budget was limited. They could only do so much stuff. And by virtue of having limited bandwidth, they could only find so much stuff, and you were likely the beneficiary of the fact that they just couldn't dig into you. The second thing is, as I mentioned before, is that AI is now being used on top of the ACE data. And so now the adoption has been really permeated and is being permeated. I was just looking at the 2027 CBP budget request, and there is a new line on there for AI tools, which is separate from ACE, that is being used. It's a small team. I think there's about 30 headcount that's being requisitioned for this one group, which was a pilot before, and now I think it's being instantiated. And their whole job is to figure out how to extract meaningful information from what is happening within ACE. Okay, and so this is very important as it relates to how CBP is going forward and what their strategy is as they move forward in time to find errors, discrepancies, anomalies within the ACE data that they are now going to be able to come back to the trade and explore those errors and extract potentially additional revenue and additional penalties, i.e. revenue, from the trade. And, again, the patterns across the importers are going to be found. Okay, and this is hard to really understand today. We don't know totally the extent and the scope of what the patterns are, what they're looking for, and where those patterns are going to exist. But we do know that they have lots of data, and their ability to find these patterns is going to be dramatically enhanced by virtue of the AI. And so, you can dig your head in the sand and pretend that this isn't happening. But the reality is that as these things come to the fore, CBP is going to be able to address a lot of the challenges that they have with importers, whether they are big or small today. Okay, and whereas yesterday, the whole thing was about, well, unless you're a Fortune 100, you're likely not being asked for things. In today's world, all bets are off. Who knows who they're coming after? So in the old world, the chances of being selected for an investigation of any sort, a 28, a 29, a full-blown audit was reasonably low. The chances of significant findings of errors was reasonably low. And the chances, therefore, of meaningful consequence, I'm calling them penalties, but let's call it, they might not be penalties, just might be sort of a different duty rate that is required to be paid or whatever. The penalty, it was just a low chance. You had this low chance of being selected all the way through to low chance of meaningful penalties. The risk profile was exceptionally low in the old environment, and that was 40 years. In our new customs environment today, post second Trump administration, the customs environment is now an exceptionally high risk environment. So what we see are the chances of being selected for a 28 and a 29 are really high. The chances of there being findings that are meaningful at all is high. And the chances of penalties are really high. And so what was your process in yesterday's world to understand where your risk exposure was within your organization that was seen both from your organization and from CBP, were they to come in and evaluate your processes and procedures, it was seen as being acceptable in the old world. And in the new world, those processes are going to be seen as both ineffectual and unacceptable in the customs world. And customs isn't necessarily going to tell you that they find them unacceptable, because as we have seen and we are going to see as we move forward, the chances of CBP being able to find anomalies and penalize you for that, they might actually be quite thrilled that your processes aren't up to a status, up to snuff. And they'll be happy to just keep on coming back and keep on coming back and hitting you up for more and more additional penalties. So the point here is that we are in a new world, and that new world is going to require new processes to manage your customs and the interactions with your customs broker to ensure that you understand what is being filed and maintained at customs, at CBP. That's where we are today. So, just to put a finer point on this, in the old world, we were in a place where CBP might find your errors. And in today's world, we're in a world where CBP will find your errors. And that dramatically changes the risk profile within your organization. And again, I would assert that the likelihood that your senior leaders understand this is virtually zero. So one of your jobs as somebody who's working in the trade compliance organization, or perhaps the leader of the trade compliance organization, is to educate your senior leaders that this actually is a new world and the consequences are going to be real in this new world. Okay, and that's not necessarily an easy conversation to have, nor is it one that is going to be necessarily well received within your leadership team, but it is your job and obligation to represent that perspective so that you have the resources you need to address and protect your organization in this new world. Okay, so let's go through what a typical process was that was acceptable in the old world. So I would expect that most of you are familiar with swim lane diagrams. In the top lane I've labeled it forwarder, but it's forwarder, vendor, the external supply chain. You are the IOR, the importer of record, in that purple middle swim lane, and then your customs broker sort of occupies the orange bottom swim lane. And I think this is a pretty standard process. Certainly, as I travel and speak to people, this seems to be approximately what most people's processes are. That you, within your organization, maintain a product dictionary. People call it different things: an item list, product dictionary, an item master. In all cases, it is your SKU list, or whether you call it a SKU or just an item, along with its relevant customs details. Oftentimes, that could be as slim as an HTS code. Sometimes you might carry with it more detailed or more columns on it: HTS code, country of origin, value, potentially duty rate, and so on and so forth. I've seen spreadsheets as limited as 2 or 3 columns, and I've seen spreadsheets as wide as going to be BZ almost, which is 3 times 26, so 108 columns wide. Most are somewhere in the middle, 20 to 30 columns wide. But the thing that's important here to understand is that this is shared with the broker on a periodic basis, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, hopefully more frequent than that. And there's sort of like this trust that is put into how you share it, and as you share it, that the broker is going to use the most up-to-date one. The reason that you share it periodically is because it's changing, products are being added, information is being refined and updated within your, call it, spreadsheet or database, and you want your broker to use the most up-to-date information. We like to think that the brokers always do what we ask of them, but this is a manual process, and manual processes are not always followed exactly right. When a shipment is being executed, the shipment packet, which is typically minimally a commercial invoice, a packing list, and a bill of lading, is forwarded. You have instructions to forward it to your broker. The broker receives that information, and then they're going to put it through what I call a black box process. You know almost nothing about how they do their job unless you were on the broker side. They're going to take that commercial invoice. They are going to somehow transform that commercial invoice into a customs entry. Oftentimes, the IOR is also sent those documents, but sometimes the documents go through the broker and wind up in the IOR's environment through the broker. But regardless, you're going to have some kind of document repository internally, hopefully, where all the documents reside. You need that because at some point you're going to have to substantiate your entry, and that's the requirement that CBP puts on you. Okay, and from there, once the black box process is executed, they're going to create the 3461 or the 7501, pass that to ACE, and that entry is then going to be forwarded to you. And that's going to probably be forwarded in an inbox, or perhaps you get that in an FTP server or something like that. And then at some point in the future, you are going to audit a subset of those results to ensure that the broker has, quote unquote, done their job appropriately. And so we're going to call it an audit, but let's be real. An audit is often, when most people use the term audit, what they're really saying is we have a standard that we're going to audit against. We know what the answer is, and we're going to figure out if whoever's done some work meets the standard. In this case, it's a little bit different. It's not a classic audit. What is happening is the broker is doing a transformation, and what you are trying to do as the auditor is to ensure that they've done their job properly. But the only way that you can do that job is to ensure that you do the transformation yourself. And once you've done that transformation, you're not going to compare it. We're going to talk a little bit about what this activity really is. Certainly, it's a manual process. Nobody would disagree with that. And if there are mistakes, whenever they're found, they're going to be corrected through some kind of workflow with your customs broker by way of a post-summary correction. And the point to make here is that the post-summary correction is kind of a tricky one to navigate, right? We have an obligation to ensure that the information stored by CBP is correct. And when we discover that something's incorrect, we actually want to correct the record, or at least theoretically, we want that record to be corrected. The challenge is that what CBP gives us is a 10-day window from the time the goods enter or are come through, or the 3461 is created, to the finalization of that entry. And you have a 10-day window to make corrections. But if your process is such and your volumes are such that you're not able to do this contemporaneously, when you find errors, were you to find errors as part of your process, you're not going to be able to hit that 10-day window, which means you have to do a post-summary correction. And every time you do a post-summary correction, CBP marks that down as you did something wrong and you had to correct it. And the more you do that activity, the more CBP says, I don't think this company has a good process. Maybe they're a good company to take a look at, right? And so there's sort of like this dual view. Yes, you want your stuff correct, but every time you make a correction, it's looked upon negatively by CBP. Okay, so here's what I was talking about with the audit challenge, where what we think is an audit is really something different. Okay, so I made this slide a couple years ago for an ICPA presentation I did at the annual conference on entry writing. And here's the thing. this is a simplified commercial invoice, a table of a commercial invoice. You have 4 parts on it. They have some quantities and prices, and the total is just, the arithmetic on sort of quantity times price. And let's take a very simple example where there is no adjustments that need to be made. There are no assists that need to be incorporated. Like, this is just a simple thing. When we look at the customs entry, and let's pretend that this customs entry was done properly, there isn't one field on this customs entry line item level that you would be able to match to the commercial invoice. These two things there's not one data element that's the same. Okay, now the goal, what you're being tasked with is, well, as part of the audit process, I need to make sure the broker did the right job. How can I do that when I have a 7501, which is the customs entry, and not one data element relates back to the commercial invoice? That's something to think about. How do we do this? And the answer is, well, you have to recreate. You have to start with the commercial invoice and work your way forward to the entry, get that information right, do all of the steps that need to be done that a broker does, and now you're in a position where you're able to compare what the work that you did, which is now a standard, to the work that the broker did to ensure that that work was done appropriately. Okay, so essentially you have to do all the work that the broker did. So here's the thing. When you're doing an audit, when you think about your audit process, you're actually doing at least 3 different sets of activities. You are looking for declarative correctness. So this is like, did they use the right HTS code? Did they apply ADD CBD appropriately? And you're supposed to know this as the trade compliance professional. Did they use the appropriate country of origin? The second set of activities is transformational correctness. So yes, I understand that they used the right HTS code. Did they actually apply the correct duty rate? Was the appropriate PGA code applied? And so on and so on. Were 301s appropriately applied, or 232s, or things of that nature? Were the units converted appropriately based on what things are doing? And these are all things that the broker ought to do, but there are so many examples of when brokers have failed to do this appropriately. And then the last one is sort of like a historical process perspective, which is like, was it filed in a timely manner? And do we have the appropriate documentation on file? Do they have the documentation on file? Were there certain requirements in our standard operating procedures that had to be followed, and were they, right? So you're trying to do all of this stuff, and the simple fact is as you're trying to do this stuff, you are actually doing a subset of all of these things. However comprehensive you think your audit process is, it's likely doing a subset of these things, because a customs entry has a lot of fields, and it's got a lot of transformation that's happening, and it's got a lot of process requirement. And almost certainly you're not reviewing all things all the time across all aspects. And you're certainly doing it almost certainly on a subset of the total number of entries that you file. So the biggest problem with the process is that if you're doing monthly or quarterly audits, that is done too late. The net result of doing audit on a periodic basis is that you will not be able to correct the record in your 10-day window, which means you have to do post-summary corrections unless you're participating in the reconciliation process. The audit just takes too much time, ultimately. You are, as a trade compliance professional, as we have said, the trade compliance world is getting way more complex. Your resources have not expanded, and you have real things to do as part of your job. Goods need to continue to flow. Your audit job is always a secondary thing, and you never have enough time to do all of the entries that you need to do, the comprehensiveness of it. And so it's just too big a task for what you need to do. And um, unless you're doing a full recreation of what the broker does, and I haven't spoken to almost anybody that does this in a manual way, um, there's just too much work. You're doing a very, very small subset and almost not doing the transformation at all of what the broker is doing. And so your view on what you're auditing is so narrow that yes, you can say you're doing it. To an extent, you could say you're meeting the CBP requirements, but to pretend that you are doing this in a manner that is going to ferret out systematic mistakes so that they get dealt with your broker on a systematic basis continually. So continual process improvement is so very thin, so very unlikely. These are all problems that exist with this old audit process. So in this new world that we're living in, we need to be able to understand what the new world needs. So the first thing is that in the new world, we need to be real time. Okay, that as the broker is doing their job, we as a process need to be able to oversee what the broker is doing, identify errors in real time, and resolve them within the 10-day window that's provided to us such that we are confident with the information that is being sent and held with customs. In order to do this in any meaningful way, it's got to be fully automated. So we can't be, as trade compliance professionals, saddled with having to review everything. At volume, we have to be able to deal with only those things that need eyes on. And when something has been identified as needing eyes and hands on, we're able to deal with that, dispose of it, and file it easily within the 10-day window. And finally, it needs to be holistic. We can't be sampling a subset, 10% of the entries that are going through. We want to be able to review and have oversight over 100% of the entries that are being filed on our behalf. And so for these reasons, we've built a new entry audit module that has been designed to automatically reconstruct the full entry from the commercial invoice. And I'm going to talk about a few of the tricks that we've had to develop and technologies that we've had to develop in order to support this. It needs to be contemporaneous and real time and be able to be dealt with in the 10-day filing window. And as we said on the previous slide, it has to be holistic across not just all of the entries, but all of the data elements, because if customs is able to find one data element where there's something wrong, they are now able to assess penalties for that, whether they're big or small. And you might as well just have the full data set, and especially if this is being done in an automated fashion, have the full data set validated so that the errors are just eliminated. So let's go through a new workflow that is what the third wave automated audit module looks like. And you'll note that the third wave has been sort of put into the IOR workflow because it's technology that is used and could be considered as part of the importer of records technology stack. So as previously, there is a product dictionary. Almost certainly the third wave product master is more comprehensive than the spreadsheets or databases that you've been using. It was designed specifically for trade and compliance. And it was designed to house and understand all of the data related to trade, including things on the tariff schedule, but also PGAs that you may have and the structures of the PGAs that you need for the products. Also, what I don't have on this is the accounts, and on accounts, which would be things like your vendors and forwarders and things of that nature, where you would have elements like MIDs or registration codes. If you're dealing in pharma or food, you'd have the FDA registration code for the facilities and things of that nature, which is important to validate and verify on your entries as well. From there, that information can automatically be shared on a periodic basis, but mechanically that could be done nightly, right? Again, you have a problem that your broker going to use the most up-to-date information. That will not be solved unless it's done in an automated fashion, which we've done previously with the broker, but we'll be able to come back to that because on the validation, we'll ensure that it's being done properly. Again, from a broker perspective, nothing's going to change. They're going to get their commercial docs. They're going to put it through the black box process. What is changing, though, is as Third Wave is getting the information, you see that box called Third Wave IDP. IDP stands for Intelligent Document Processing. And what that really is an OCR process, optical character recognition in the old vernacular. Third Wave is going to ingest the commercial invoice, make sense of the information on it, and through the wonders of AI, getting to that point where we can turn that document into data is we do a very, very good job of that. So Third Wave now is able to turn the documents into a data feed that then is able to go through the Third Wave entry writing module to create the Third Wave calculated 3461 and what will turn into a 7501. So immediately before the broker goes through their black box process, you have a baseline around which you are now able to evaluate what the broker has created on your behalf. And so when the broker creates the 3461 or 7501 and sends that to ACE, now within the Third Wave environment, as the broker sends that information to Third Wave, we're able to evaluate it for discrepancies. And where there are discrepancies, we're able to build a workflow with that broker to resolve the discrepancy, correct the 7501 before it finalizes, and create an accurate record with CBP. And obviously for those entries where it passes, then you just go to end. And so now you're only dealing with the elements that are incorrect or there's a problem with or somebody needs to have eyes on. And so Third Wave is going to sort of is agnostic whether the broker is aggregating lines by HTS code or not. It's able to understand PGAs and whether the data filed against the PGA is accurate or not. It's able to understand transactional data as well as master data and so on and so forth. We're able to do this by combining three sort of new technologies that Third Wave has developed. The first, as I mentioned, was intelligent document processing. So that's the ability to turn documents, PDF documents, into data. So stripping that information from what was previously a document where you couldn't access the data because it was in a PDF, and we know that we can't really turn that into data. With the magic of AI, we're able to do that now. We have, as I mentioned before, a very sophisticated product master that is comprehensive in nature and can store as much information as you have that allows for the information to be transformed into a customs entry. And we have a unique entry writing capability that has been developed over the last 20 years that enables raw data to be transformed into entry into a 7501 format to enable the comparison to what the broker has on their side. So how does, if you were to use the Third Wave audit tool, how does this change the game? Well, in the old world and in the current, with your current audit process, your coverage is typically small. You have a subset of the data elements that you're auditing. The work effort is incredibly high. the effectiveness of identifying process snafus. And I love the use of the term snafu in this instance because it really is a snafu in the technical definition. So for those of you that don't know, a snafu was an acronym from the Vietnam War, I believe, which was situation normal, all effed up, which is, maybe not the nicest way of saying your current audit process. It's like, it's a pain, it's not very good, and there are all kinds of problems with it. There are snafus. And so given that the effectiveness of identifying things systematically is really, really low. And the result of these things is that your overall trade risk increases dramatically, is very, very high. With Third Wave, you have full coverage of all your entries and all the data elements across those entries. The work level or work effort is low because it's being automated, and the work that needs to be done is purely against the errors that are found. The effectiveness of finding those errors is exceptionally high. And your ability to identify systematic problems across the process and therefore improve on those things is very, very high, which means that you're continually improving this audit process. You're continually removing risk from your trade environment. And as a result, you're continually lowering your trade risk within your organization, which really is the goal of your organization, your trade compliance organization. So I'm going to sort of end it there. I'm going to check sort of right now to see if we have any comments or questions. I apologize that if there were any comments or questions I didn't get to. But my contact information, as I said at the beginning, is here on this last slide. We're going to be forwarding these slides to you as part of the recording and the follow-up email that we're going to send out. I want to thank you for participating in this webinar, and I want to invite you to contact me with questions or for a discussion, if you will, around this. Sorry, I just see a question came in here. What is the problem you are solving besides custom audit? So, great question, James. The specific challenge with the customs audit app module is specifically customs audit, is finding errors in customs audit. When you ask the question, can we help with classification? That depends. In the end, and oftentimes yes, but it depends on what you mean by classification. So this is maybe a conversation that we can have offline, but people confuse at least two different concepts with classification. One way of understanding what classification is I have 100,000 parts. I want these 100,000 parts classified with the appropriate 10-digit HTS code automatically. ChatGPT, go for it and classify these things for me. That's one way that at some point AI is going to help with that. Third Wave, that is not what Third Wave does. Third Wave, and I could point you in that direction. You're talking from HTS and freight broker classification. So I think what you're saying is from the freight forwarder side or the broker side. The question is like, I have a whole list of of items, and I want to be able to systematically be able to classify as these items come in very, very quickly on behalf of the importer. Generally speaking, again, we can have this conversation offline, James, but the idea is that typically Third Wave, and I should have said this right at the outset, we support importers of record largely. And so the idea, and large importers of record, so all of these companies would have sophisticated, I use in air quotes, but reasonably sophisticated trade compliance organizations, at least a trade compliance profession. They've identified that, wait a second, there's a skill here, and we need somebody to internally be responsible for this trade compliance thing. Oftentimes they're LCBs, but not always. And the idea is that the importer, generally speaking, classifies their own products and has their product dictionary maintained internally, and that is going to be shared with the customs broker. What Third Wave generally doesn't support are the brokers or the forwarders that have brokerages that are there to support smaller customers that don't necessarily have trade compliance organizations, where they're responsible for classifying the product for entry on behalf of the importer of record. So I don't know if that explains your question. If you're looking for a system that can help automatically classify products, I do have at least one solid recommendation for you, and I will follow up with you, James, to forward that to you, and hopefully that could be helpful. So again, if you have other questions, I'm around. My email address, grant@thirdwave.co. ThirdWave's website is thirdwave.co. And again, if you wanted to follow me or contact me at LinkedIn/Grant Cernick, that's where I can be found. And I want to, again, thank you for attending this webinar. I hope you found it useful. And if we can help in any way, even think through problems, then I want to invite you to reach out to me and us here at Third Wave. So anyway, with that, we'll bring this to a close. And again, I want to thank you for participating here. Have a good one.